My granddad was a proud man, and I think he'll be looking down today with his trademark grin at how many there are to celebrate his life. I know Thomas, Meg, James and myself are all proud to be the grandkids of Tom and Lindy. It's something we take a lot of pride in when someone says, "Oh, you're never Tom and Lindy's lad," which in Scarborough seems to be all the time. I always thought he was some local celebrity. I'll never forget going to the Futurists to see a Queen tribute band, and there was a line of women waiting to say hello to him and give him a kiss. So my 7-year-old self thought I was stood next to a celebrity, stood next to Elvis or something, and he just turned around to me with a smile and he said something like, "Don't tell your nana." One of the reasons I'm proud of being his grandson is the things that they've taught me. A lot of that is music. When on long drives, Nana and Grandad would show James and myself music from when they went dancing all those years ago. So Eddie Cochran, Lonnie Donegal, Neil Sedaka, the list goes on. Me and Grandad would sing Billy Fury, Like I've Never Been Gone, every time, although I'm not sure we did it much justice. James and Nana would sing Bobby's Girl, for anyone wondering. Grandad and myself shared a love of Sunderland, a memory I'll hold on to forever. It's taken him to the stadium of light for the first time. It was against Aston Villa. We lost 1-0, but his face was a picture. However, I don't think James liked being dragged to the football. He was more interested in the McDonald's on the way home. It wasn't just music and football he showed us. If you saw Grandad without him telling a story or talking about his time at sea, something was wrong. Being a fisherman is something my Grandad held dear to him, and he always had time to tell a story or two. They usually started with, "When I was your age," or "You don't know what hard work is, lad." But those stories taught me a lot. With that being said, I wanted to read a poem that is fitting for my Grandad and him saying goodbye. Days ended, dim my eyes, but journey long before me lies. Farewell, friends, I hear the call, the ship's beside the stony wall. Foam is white and waves are grey. Beyond the sunset leads my way. Foam is salt, the wind is free. I hear the rising of the sea. Farewell, friends, the sails are set. The wind is east, the moorings fret. Shadows long before me lie, beneath the ever-bending sky. But islands lie behind the sun, that I shall rise, ere all is done. Lands there are, to west of west, where night is quiet and sleep is rest. Guided by the lonely star, beyond the utmost harbour bar, I'll find the heavens fair and free, and beaches of the starlit sea. Ship, my ship, I seek the west, and fields and mountains ever blessed. Farewell to the bottom end at last. I see the star above my mast.
You did well. Good afternoon. To those that don't know me, I'm Megan, the only granddaughter to my granddad Tom. For as long as I can remember, I've always written silly and serious poems for lots of different occasions, but thankfully never one for a funeral until now. My granddad always really liked to hear them, and he even sent one to the newspapers once when I was only 11. Luckily it was a serious one, because my silly ones are not very appropriate. So I felt the only way that I could say farewell to my granddad was to write him a poem. Part of it's silly, and part of it was serious. And I know he's listening, so I hope it's done him proud. I am feeling truly honoured to have had you as our granddad. And what a pleasure it is to share some of the fun times that we've had. Although a travelled man, Scarborough was always your home, and despite the many miles between us, you were always at the end of the phone. Growing up, you always knew just how to make us smile. With silly songs and pranks and stories, it was just your style. I remember climbing on your bed and laying across your tummy while you told us stories about farts and poo and things that we found funny. We would stare at your tattoos that faded more with every glance, but when you tensed, Popeye flexed and Olive used to dance. Even on that last morning, we were laughing and reminiscing about that slide you raced down in Florida so fast that your trunks went missing. You had such love for many things across your long life, but none compared to that of your family and, of course, your beloved wife. Over 55 years of marriage, you were proud of that for sure. After all, who else could do 55 years of laying next to his snore? To those that knew you well would know that your sleep wasn't all that great. You thought that waking up past 5 was sleeping in too late. And I guess that's what you get for years of early rising. So straight to bed after Emmerdale was hardly that surprising. And even after the fishing days were well and truly over, you became Captain Tom once more with your days on the Coronia. Although the sea was without a doubt your favourite place to be, you began to get into football, even if Sunderland rarely topped the league. And I can't not mention Poppy, who you often called your baby, to think that you never wanted a dog, but she became your right-hand lady. Everyone that's here today is full of love and admiration. You were the most extraordinary man, a true inspiration. Your great-grandchildren, grandchildren, your kids and your wife, and everybody here today will celebrate your life. So I'd like to end this poem in a celebratory way and cheer the amazing life he's had. Please let's give hip hip. Thank you.
So it's my job to follow that. Before I start, I'd just like to congratulate both Meg and Joseph, because as you could tell from that, that's not easy to do. I'm shaking trying to do this myself, so I'm full of admiration for the two of them doing it. Please bear with me. I'm at that stage where I need glasses. I'll read, because if not, it'll turn into a rant and it won't necessarily make much sense. So bear with me as we get through this. I'd like to echo Joseph's comments and introduce myself to those of you that don't know me. I'd be surprised if there are many that don't. I'm the other Tom Rowley. I'd like to thank you on behalf of my mum, Lindy, and the rest of the family for attending here today, and all those that unfortunately have been unable to make it but are watching online. Genuinely, it means a lot to us. All the comments, cards, flowers, and visits that my mum's had over the last couple of weeks have made a big difference to us in realising just how well loved and respected my dad was. As many of you may be aware, my dad had unfortunately delivered more than his fair share of eulogies at funerals of friends and family members alike over recent years, and I'm sure he will have done so for some of you here whose families are represented here today. That said, I think from my chats with him, he found them therapeutic and useful, not only in the terms of a means of remembrance, but more importantly to him, he found them an opportunity to celebrate the life of a loved one who'd passed. Thankfully, unlike him, I'm not used to delivering eulogies myself, so in preparation for today, I did look up the meaning of eulogy in the dictionary, and it states, I quote, "A commendatory oration or writing to honour one recently deceased." So to that end, I stand before you today on behalf of our family to honour Tom Rowley, my dad. I have to stop saying Rowley, Mum, because I've moved down south and I have to explain it to southerners, so it's Rowley up here, Rowley down south. When I started to think about what I wanted to write and what I wanted to say today, I kept coming back to a really moving and lovely conversation I had with my dad in the early hours of the morning on the 14th of April this year, the day he died. And it's because of that conversation I'm going to give his eulogy a title. So here we go. And the title is Time, Tide and Taxes. I'm going to start with tide, so not entirely in sequence, but we'll get through it. Dad, as I'm sure you're all aware, was a man very much born to the sea. He was immensely proud of his roots and his fishing heritage, and since initially being pulled from school to cover for a crewman for his own dad, who was ill at the time, he never really looked back, was always a fisherman, was always a mariner, and was always going to be thus. That said, when we had our early morning chats, like everyone, he used to tell me about his ups and downs, and we chatted and generally exchanged memories and stories about life at sea. During those chats, he would often remind me that the skills needed afloat needed to be learnt. They weren't just yours by right. You didn't get them because of your name, you didn't get them because of anything else. You needed to learn them. And as an example of this, one of his early memories was when he was at sea with his dad. They went up to the bay in Haben Wyke, and my granddad landed him on a rock to haul a line of pots in and got him to throw the pots into the boat. And crucially to the story at this point, you need to know that this was all happening on an ebbing tide. So once very pleased with himself, young Tom had managed to recover all the pots and got them into the boat for my granddad. My granddad was no longer able to get the boat close enough to the rock to be able to get my dad back into the boat. So granddad just casually shouted, "Climb the cliff, Tom lad, and get the bus home, I'll see you later." My dad learnt two valuable lessons that day. He learnt that you have to wait for the tide won't wait for you. He apparently had to wait quite a while, a number of hours, before he managed to get ashore and climb up that cliff. He also learnt, critically, that you need some cash in your pocket, because when he got to the top of the cliff he didn't have any money and he had to walk all the way back to Scarborough in barnskin and sea boots. So that was a lesson for life. From a personal point of view, I know that initially at least I did upset him. I did upset him when I opted for the Navy instead of fishing to start off with. This is harder than I thought. We do, however, and we always have had, a shared love for the sea. We used to exchange stories about the camaraderie, the life in general, and the time upon it. I will always hold dear and remember the times I managed to get to sea with me in destroyers. One night in particular was when I was taking, this about 20 years ago, I was taking HMS York through the very busy Dover Straits in the middle of the night. We were doing 28 knots. My dad just come up one watch with me and sat at the back of the bridge. I was so busy during that watch, I even forgot that he was there most of the time. We got to the end of the watch. I went off watch. Me and my dad went down to the mess to get a cuppa. And he just patted me on the back and said, "Bloody hell, Tom, I didn't know you could do that." In that moment, I was about 38, but I felt forgiven for not going to sea as a fisherman. I genuinely went off watch there feeling about 40 foot tall. Right, come on, I need to toughen up. I cannot finish talking about tides without mentioning his first love. Our Margaret. Sorry, Mum. But I think even you'll admit that our Margaret made you the other woman at times. When Dad took on our Margaret, I know he always keenly felt the responsibility to provide both for us, his family, the boat itself, and all the crew that he worked with over the years. I also know that he never lost that sense of responsibility when in later life he left fishing to skip a Regal Lady in Coronia, and during his lifeboat work a little bit later on. He genuinely enjoyed his time as Captain Tom, despite the challenges of skippering a 90-year-old flat-bottomed single-screwed ship that was, let's be honest, often full of drunk or seasick landsmen. Nevertheless, he loved it mainly because he got to interact with people, and his sense of fun meant that he had a great deal of fun doing it. His time with the lifeboat, on the other hand, I know he saw that as a privilege, and that allowed him to use his knowledge of the sea and the local conditions to pay it back after his time at sea had ended. And so with regards to tide, Dad, I'm sure you had it thoroughly sorted. Next, we'll talk about his nemesis, taxes. So in this trilogy of title, we'll talk about taxes, but seeing as we're here in St Mary's Church, a house of God, I won't tell you his actual words that he used when he was describing his thoughts on taxes. Let's just be clear though, the word wrangham was a word that was often heard in our house. Some strange requests to land fish at odd times weren't unusual either. There'll be people in the room that don't know what I'm talking about. If you know, you know. If you don't, you don't. If you do, don't worry, I'm not going to incriminate anybody. No, the conversation that we had on that morning on the 14th of April was more about a different sort of tax, or I think at least that's what my dad was referring to. It was a case of paying it back. That's what he was thinking of. And by that, I don't mean that he was paying it back to the taxman, but paying it back to others, a sort of life tax, if you will, that he saw from his perspective was due if you'd had personal success or a good life. Dad, I believe personally, was a natural mentor. He was a great teacher and an even better friend. He would invest his time and effort into you if you were prepared to learn. Therefore, in those terms, if we're talking about tax, I can safely say that my dad had his taxes sorted, and he definitely paid it back. Finally, time. And I'm sure Dad didn't see it like this, but he gave us all time. Because, to be perfectly honest, without him, we wouldn't be here. He met and married Lindy, my mum, and he gave her his time and she gave him hers. Married for 55 years, as you've heard. They were and have remained fantastic parents, grandparents and great-grandparents. We are, and I know I speak for us all as a family, very lucky. Joe and I had what I think of as a fantastic childhood, and we will always have some amazing memories from that. This is made all the more impressive if you think about it, with Dad being away the majority of our childhood at sea, especially when we were little. And maybe I'm looking back at it through rose-tinted glasses, but I do think we did an awful lot together. I remember laughing a lot. Dad was a practical joker, and like most men, and I'll include myself in this, sorry Tracy, we're slow to grow up. We're a bit childish and bugger about a lot. That was Mum's problem. As far as me and our Joe are concerned, he was just a big bundle of fun. It wasn't always funny. On a Sunday night, he used to throw crabs and lobsters into the bath that me and Joe would share the night before school. We often screamed, flapped about and made such a mess that we'd flood the bathroom, overspill, water would run down the walls into the kitchen and make a right mess. Mum would be screaming and shouting, Dad would be laughing, and me and our Joe would be running round the walls in the bathroom with being chased by lobsters and crabs. And just to clarify, I know some of you are thinking of it, we were posh kids. We had a bath every Sunday night, whether we needed it or not. Mum and Dad took us on holidays, took us on day trips. They made sure they took time to create the memories that we've got and have continued to do so with the grandkids and the great-grandkids. And I know we'll all continue to hold on to those precious memories. He couldn't have done it without me mum, but neither could she have done it without him. He was as proud of her as we were of him. That's as it should be. So then, eventually, on the 14th of April, when time finally did catch up with Dad, we were of course heartbroken. But regardless, all of us that day, we agreed during the same day, to be perfectly honest. And I'll use the phrase that my mum's just picked up on, that if Carlsberg could have done last days, that's the day my dad had. It was a brilliant last day. All our family managed to see him. Everybody managed to speak to him. Everybody had a joke with him. Everybody had a cry with him before he passed, very peacefully, holding my mum's hand. I'm nearly there. To finish then, my conversation with Dad on the morning of the 14th centred on the saying, as you can imagine, you can't beat time, tide and taxes. But to my mind, Dad, you give it damn good go. And I reckon on the terms that I've expressed here, in terms of tax, tide and time, you beat the lot. So, Tom Rowley, a friend, a brother, an uncle, a husband, a dad, a granddad, and a great-granddad. He'll forever be loved and missed by us all. Rest in peace.